So welcome everybody to, this is just a high level overview of Global Genes research program called RareX. And I'm going to get started with the slides, and you can ask questions in the text, in the chat. Of course, I've only been doing this for a year. Great. So we're excited to be part of Global Genes. If you're not already affiliated with Global Genes, I highly suggest that you go to their website. They've got some fantastic programs, all at no cost. They were, when I was working in my daughter's disease, they were a huge help in terms of networking and resources and toolkits. So they do lots of things, and one of those things is research, and that's RareX. There's something that we talk about now, which is a next generation advocacy. And part of that has to do with how technology has changed the research world in terms of genetics and IT. But in short, advocacy looks like all different shapes and sizes nowadays. It's not one person starting an organization around a kitchen table and growing it from support and eventually to research. So these are some of the things that Global Genes touches upon in terms of the various stages of advocacy, and you'll see data collection is a very important part. So who is RareX? As I said, we're part of a program of Global Genes, and we were created out of frustration, frankly. Organizations like yours didn't have the time, the money, and the knowledge to know how to properly collect high quality data. And researchers, both in academia and industry, were having a hard time getting their hands on high quality data. And that was all slowing down the development of treatments for the over 10,800 diseases, rare diseases. We are a platform that collects data, which is primarily what we're going to talk about today. We have set up our consent and our technology to be able to connect to existing data outside of RareX. And most importantly, you can't just collect data and let it sit and collect dust. You need to get it out the door. And we have a fantastic way of getting that data shared globally. Today, when I talk about sharing data, whether it's with an organization like yours, or whether it's with an academic researcher or industry, I always mean de-identified data. So RareX are the only, a small number of people at RareX are the only people that will see the identified data. And by identified data, I mean all the identifiers, the names, addresses, birth dates, and things like that. All of that is stripped before researchers see it. When I say researcher today, I mean the ones that you know about in academia and at hospital centers and at places like NIH. I also mean the researchers at large pharmaceutical companies and small biotechs. So we've leveled the playing field that we are helping organizations like you collect data at no cost. So no matter how big or small the organization is, there's no burden. And we are making that de-identified data available to researchers at no cost. So you all may be at various places, but rare disease data generally has at least one of three problems. One is that the data exists, but it's in a silo. And that's just the way research has been designed over the years, where a researcher or academic center does a study and they collect data and hopefully they publish on it, but that data stays where it was collected for various reasons. Or there was a trial done at a biotech and the trial failed and they have 5 years of data, but there's nowhere to put it. It was not collected to be shared. So consenting becomes a really big issue. So what happens over time is people get what's called survey exhaustion. So you have all these data is in these different silos, the data is not being shared. So researchers who continue to study it are coming back to patients with the same surveys over and over again. The other issue is less known, and I actually fell into this bucket, is that data exists, but it's not structured properly, or it wasn't from standardized surveys. This is not something they talked about back in 2010 when I was helping the Phelan-McDermid syndrome collect data in a registry. My daughter has Phelan-McDermid syndrome, and it's a rare neurological disease. And our clinicians had data in silos, but we didn't have any open data, so we began collecting it. But we clung to we are so rare, we must ask our own questions because we're different than everybody else idea. And so the researchers helped us make up questions. And places like Chords and Invitae and other platforms allow you to bring your own questions because, you're so rare. What I've come to realize after 12 years in the space is that we are rare, but we are not unique. And by that, I mean, my daughter's disease has symptoms that probably at least 100 other syndromes have. Her genetics, her reasons for these symptoms are unique. And so the beauty of having things in common with other diseases is that they can be studied. You can study across diseases. For instance, you can study different vision loss diseases at the same time or different kidney diseases at the same time. But you can only do that accurately if those patients answered the same surveys. They can be called surveys, measures, assessments. So in the early years of data collection, when everybody was telling groups like yours, you've got to get data, you've got to get data, they didn't tell us how, didn't tell us where to put it. They didn't tell us, what kind of data to collect, and they didn't tell us how to share it. So RareX is solving for all of that. And finally, with the onset of sequencing, there's a lot of new diseases that have no data, not even in silos. So when I talk about structured data, I'm talking about surveys that already exist. The problem is not all surveys are good. The neurodevelopmental field is filled with bad surveys, and I've had to answer a lot of them. So what we do is we find experts who find the best surveys for a particular area. So first we found what I call the head to toe survey, and that asks simple questions about every system of the body from head and vision and hearing and dental down to toe, skin, feet, skeletal, and so forth, skin, skeletal, and muscle. So from those answers, we then want you to, if you said yes or unsure, go to the next level. And so we found the best surveys for those systems. Still pretty simple. And then for each level, we need to find the appropriate surveys. And we don't do that. We don't make up questions, but we also don't make up surveys. Survey validation is a big science, and it takes a long time to do. So we get experts from outside of RareX to identify what is the best muscle regression survey, or what is the most appropriate, retinal dysfunction survey, and so forth. The other thing that we don't want you as an organization to have to worry about and pay for and worry about and pay for and worry about is something called governance. And this was another thing that nobody really explained to patient organizations when they were telling us to get data. It's everything from how you collect data, where you collect it, where you put it, how you store it, and how you get it out. And every legal and ethical and financial part of that. And I can tell you, it is a huge burden and cost to have to do that as an organization. It really takes you sideways when you have to learn about data regulations around the world, and when you have to learn about how to write a protocol and so forth. So this was one of the very obvious things that RareX knew we could take off the shoulders of patient organizations. It became very complex a few years ago when Europe tightened data regulations, not for the purpose of medical information. It was really for the purpose of financial institutions information. Nevertheless, it affects everybody in Europe. And different countries see those regulations in different ways. So we literally have to go country by country to make sure that what we're doing is in alignment with their data regulations. And I would suggest, if you're shopping, which many of you probably are, that when you're talking to other platforms, ask who is holding the IRB. That's the oversight committee that gives you the stamp of approval that you're doing things correctly. So bear with me on the crazy slide. The past year, since we launched, we brought in 40 rare diseases. Most happen to be neurodevelopment, but we are building this for all rare diseases. So all over 10,000 diseases. We have just onboarded another 10 diseases, and we will continue to bring on about 10 diseases per month. We bring them on in a group, in a class, because we're trying to do this in a way that nobody has to wait. And we have boiled our orientation or our onboarding down to 4 weeks. So 4 one-hour calls, same time, same day, each week. And then the organization launches. So you may recognize something, we have dent disease up there. We have a lot of neurodevelopmental diseases. We have GSD1, it's a metabolic disease, as is HCU. These black boxes signify like what I call the front door or community page. That's where your families will first go. And there's frequently asked questions, and there's explanation of what is the dent disease data collection program and why should you spend your time doing it, and so forth. Once they get started, then they've come through the door and they're in this big blue house, and everybody will see the same, everybody has to see the same consent, because your consent is dependent on the age and cognition and country of the patient. But everybody will have the same data sharing survey, the same demographics, and then that head to toe survey. This head to toe survey will then determine what other surveys will appear in your, what we call a dashboard. And I'll show you an example of it. There's 2 really important reasons that we ask about all systems of the body. One is sometimes researchers make an assumption on what they've been told a phenotype is, or what they think a phenotype is, or a set of symptoms. And that's all they ask about. And years later on Facebook, some of these disease organizations are finding out that there were symptoms that they had in common with other people, but nobody ever asked about, so there was no data, and it was never published on. So we are asking about all systems of the body. The other thing is people have more than one condition. You could have, a disease, and you could have Ehlers-Danlos, or you could have Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, or you could have diabetes. So we are about the health of the entire person, not just what is occurring because of the rare disease. And we are also, for that matter, able to collect data on carriers, whether they're considered affected or unaffected, because suspicions are that unaffected may because nobody ever asked them about their health, so there was no real phenotype. The bottom is the researchers, and these researchers can come from around the world. They go through one door, they provide their credentials, they set up an account, and they engage in a data sharing agreement, which is to say that they make all the promises that they would whenever they get de-identified data. And then they query, and this is where magic can happen for you. They can query on disease that they know of. They can query on genetics, genes they've heard of, or they can query on symptoms. For instance, if someone were to go into this data collection today and query on autism, communications issues, repeated ear infections, and epilepsy, they would find data from almost every group at the top of this slide, because those are very common symptoms to neurodevelopmental disorders. The beauty of this is those researchers may have never heard of most of the diseases at the top of this slide, and they may stumble across data on participants that are perfect for what they're studying, but they had never heard of the disease in the past. And as a parent of a rare disease patient, that makes me very happy. So this is how data is generally distributed. A researcher knows your disease exists. They come to you and say, I hear you've got data that you've collected with your own checkbook and you're overseeing on your own. And then you as an organization decide whether this researcher's study is worth sharing your data or recruiting your families for. And then you de-identify the data, you send it off to the researcher, and you wait. And you hope something comes of it. Maybe it's a poster, maybe it's a publication, but you may never find out. And certainly the families that have been asked to do the surveys will likely never find out. And over time, that's going to wear people out because they're answering a lot of the same questions over and over again. At RareX, we flipped this. So any rare disease patients, including undiagnosed and what's called N of 1, can enter their data in RareX. And any researchers globally can come through that one door without knowing much about these diseases and query on that data. And they can do hypothesis building, which means they're just querying, they're asking for questions, they're looking for patterns, or they can do something that they've already gotten an IRB approval for, which is a set study. Okay. This is just to say that in green were the first stages of our questionnaires. In the yellow, we added a significant number in December and January, and in the red are areas that we will continue to find expert working groups to find the best surveys. And you will see that metabolic is there and immunology. There are two ways that a body system gets a working group. One is a sponsor, whether it's a biotech or pharmaceutical company or a funding source, comes to us and says, we are doing work in vision loss or kidney disease, and we really want our patients to be in RareX, but you all don't ask enough of the detailed questions. We will sponsor your working group. So we pull together the experts. This is an example for neurodevelopment. They come from industry, they come from researchers, they come from clinicians that see the patients and patient representatives. Most importantly, people that are familiar with the surveys and have used them. This particular group identified 252 surveys to consider, and they got it down to 13. And so we just released those 13 surveys on our platform. Most of our participants got emails or texts saying, we're really excited to tell you that we have new surveys that are applicable to your participant. Dent disease did not, because this is, for the most part, most of their participants would not have answered yes to questions that would have given the skip logic to give them these 13. So you only get asked what's pertinent to your health. So what's in it for you? I am very familiar as a parent of a rare disease adult that our time is precious and many of us don't get much sleep. So we can't just be doing favors for people here, there, and everywhere out of the goodness of our heart. So one is that de-identified summary data will be returned to you through the system, and the organization leaders then return it to the community and researchers. So summary charts, this is how many people enrolled, this is where they're from, that's the initial, but eventually it will be this percentage of people answered yes to seizures. It's a fantastic place to be found for studies and clinical trials. As I said, researchers can query on different criteria and they may stumble across your participants. This is worldwide. Not only are we accepting participants from all over the world, we have people from almost 60 different countries, although we are still in English, but it's open to researchers around the world. And this is a platform that researchers have used for several years, mostly in large studies, such as cancer studies. This also is a platform, like many of the other online platforms, frankly, where you can update your data at any time. And after the onboarding, where we train you as patient organization leaders, you then launch this, you announce it to your community with a webinar. And in that webinar, I really encourage families that this isn't a once a year kind of thing. It's definitely not a one and done. Once a year is nice, but it really should become a habit that when something changes, they go in and they change their answer. So they find the additional surveys. This gives longitudinal data for researchers. And this gives what is referred to as natural history study, which I publicly say all the time, I think is a silly word. It sounds like a museum, but what natural history study is progression of disease. You want to see what the progression of this disease is. Researchers and drug developers want to see what the progression of disease is. The only way to understand that is to follow a patient through time. And following many, many patients through time is even better. Finally, you are able to manage the data, you as a participant. The foundations, the associations, the patient organizations do not own or manage the data. So they're not deciding which researchers can and can't see the data. You as a participant say, I want to share my data very broadly, or I want to put some limitations on it. You can always change your mind on how you want to share that data. So we asked our early groups, why'd you take a chance on Rare X in the first year? And it was essentially a lot of the same things. We were taking the burden off of them so that they could focus on things like family conferences and biosample collections and family support. So this grows by the month, but we are currently have 57 different rare diseases. But we are working with 82 different patient organizations. So I don't know about your organizations, but many rare diseases can have multiple organizations across the world, but some have multiple organizations within countries. And sometimes they complement each other, and sometimes they don't get along well. And we are what we refer to as patient advocacy group, or PAG, agnostic. Since nobody's paying for this, then nobody gets to control it. So it's for the whole community, not any one organization. But for the purpose of the whole community and the best interests of every patient in the world, we encourage every organization, whether they like each other or not, to have their logo on that landing page that I'll show you in a moment. So researchers, what's in it for them? Well, you're saving them a lot of money because you as an organization have brought your families together. You've recruited them into a foundation. We have created the consent and we've created the technology. So that's all been done. And so we've identified what we hope are the best surveys to get the quality data. For genetic diseases, we ask participants to upload the genetic report. We then have a genetic curation team run by a genetic counselor who takes that data from your genetic report from the genetic lab that is full of identifiers, name, address, and so forth. And they manually put it into your account so that your genetic data sits with your survey data, your symptom data. And that, in this day and age, is very critical for genetic diseases. There are some researchers that will not take data that it does not accompany genetic data. So we work very hard to help the organizations get their families to upload their genetic reports. The other, and this is very attractive to some of the younger researchers, is the fact that they can do all this analysis in the cloud. They're not, having data sent to them that they then have to clean and then do a manual analysis on. The data's already been cleaned. And that means we've taken out the duplicates, we've looked for errors, people that were born in the future and stuff. And the actual analysis tools are in the platform. So this just shows the journey. And this first lateral part is, frankly, the least fun. And once they get past that, it's all surveys. So they go to your community page, they go through terms of use and set up their password and so forth, get through the consent and then data sharing. If there's a caregiver of a child, the caregiver gives their data, not their medical data, but their personal data, location and all of that. And then they do their own consent for their data. They would then add a patient and provide their demographics, then consent for that minor patient. Or in my case, I'm my daughter's guardian, so I consented for her as well. So there are two consents when there is a caregiver. And once you get through the data sharing, then you're off to the races with the surveys. Sorry, I'm having a disruptive mouse here. So this is just one example of what I called the front door, that community page. So this is where your families would land. Up in the left-hand corner is the name of the disease. So not the organization. So we want the whole world to be able to associate with what is the most common name of the disease. We will put tags. So if there's multiple names of diseases, when somebody Googles it, they'll still find this page. And as you scroll down, there are, what's the value to the patient? What is this all about? How do you do it? Frequently asked questions. Once they hit get started, though, they are in, as I said before, the big blue house. These are the frequently asked questions at the bottom. This page is translated, but I just want to say for now, once they hit that red button that says get started, everything will be in English. We do have industry sponsors that were very anxious for us to get translations. So we'll be translating sooner than we expected. And we hope to have up to 3 translations by the end of this year. So we are committed to this being global. This is not a US or English only project. Drugs are made all over the world. Patients live all over the world. Some patients only live in certain areas of the world if it's a disease that's specific to a certain region. So these are examples of different landing pages. The colors are different because they're based on the logo colors, and the pictures are pictures of actual patients. Once you get through the 4-week onboarding or orientation, you have your launch party, you introduce us, the data collection to your community. We're not going to drop you like a hot potato. We want you to be successful. We want researchers to find a lot of data about your disease, and we want it to be longitudinal or over time. So we will help you with providing resources, providing feedback, having recordings, and things like that. We are not going to be your personal marketing department, but we are there to make you successful. We want to do this for any and all rare diseases that need us. So this has been built to be scalable. So there is going to be eventually a limitation to how much hands-on we can be, after launch. But most organizations have the same challenges. And so while if one finds a solution, then we put that out to everybody, like this worked really well for this group, or look at this slide that this group did. So it's actually really great for you to be part of a class. This is just a checklist. In our first class, we had somebody that was very organized, and she kept saying, I feel like I should be doing more. And this was when orientation was 3 months. And so we made a quick checklist that just says, you just need to sign an agreement saying that you're going to be responsible with de-identified data, schedule a Zoom for the launch, and provide the picture and the logo for that community page, and continue to make this a commitment from your organization through time. This, again, is not a one and done. One of the great things we learned in our first year is founders, board members, scientific directors, people like you who are on this call have lots of things going on and can't be the one and only promoter of this. So we have now told every group, we need your social media person. Who's that person that's on anyway? They may not have a role in the organization, which is better because that means they don't have as many responsibilities. But that person who tends to welcome the new people or chime in when somebody has a question. And we will train that person in a matter of 15 to 30 minutes on how they can weave this messaging into social media throughout the year. I'm going to stop there, stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But Jerry, you had asked a question, I think, before we hit recording about how we differ from other platforms. We have a lot in common with other platforms, and we differ in some ways. I don't know each platform individually because everybody's always improving. There is a shopping list that I share that I personally made of things I wish I'd known in 2010 when we were starting a registry for Phelan-McDermott syndrome. Some of the things to consider are, if your disease is so small that you need to have data from people around the world, you need to ask questions about, is this going to be translated? Does this meet data regulations like GDPR? But that's not the only set of data rules outside of the United States. So that's one thing, is it global? Another thing is some platforms do allow you to upload genetic reports, but are they just sitting there? Is there a system for getting that genetic data out of the identified report and next to the symptom data? If not, then it's stuck. And as I said, in my personal experience, there were researchers that didn't care for data that didn't have genetics attached to it. Another question is, do you need to be the, provide the IRB? Is the responsibility on you as an organization? Or I think it, like with Cords, they provide the IRB.
Yeah.
And there's a cost to to having it if you're doing it yourself.
Caitlin, can I just interrupt? Because what you're saying is so helpful. I think I'm going to have to watch this recording again to just absorb everything you said. But I think it would, I don't want to, I know, I just love it when people put work in other people's hands. I'm not trying to do that, but I will say someone on your team could come up with a checklist with what you know about, not because we're like exposed.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. A checklist. Yeah. If someone could come up with like a checklist with the known registries out there and how RareX compares to them, like, handles IRB assistance, shares data globally, and where you literally, where you do it and where others don't. It is so, as it is so hard to absorb all that information and then try to translate it, communicate it out to your membership so that they understand in a succinct way. Why would we migrate from one registry to another or add on? Why would you do this? I mean, right now we have such trouble getting our families to sign up for a registry. And I know someone else who, oh, that was you, Corey.
We have the same problem. That's right.
Like, why isn't my initials on there? Sorry. Yeah, apparently we're great minds. But yeah, we have such trouble getting folks to actually fill it out that, it's just the more information we can have to succinctly communicate why we're making the change, the better. So
yes and no. Yes, I've come up with a list of shopping questions, and I generally just send that list. But I have the RareX answers. I did this in 2010 with 3 other moms, and I didn't even know what a registry was at the time. And the platforms were all different. Nord and Genetic Alliance weren't even in the games back then. It changes all the time, and I would be disrespectful if I were to say, this organization doesn't do translations, and it turns out 6 months later they are doing translations, but I don't know it because I don't follow their website. So I only want to answer to what I know. But if you're going to go to other groups, you go to their FAQ, or however you want to shop, and just compare it. And there are things that you may not need. You may not need the international aspect of it.
We definitely do.
You may have a researcher parent that doesn't mind doing the IRB, but the standardization, like the big selling factor 10 years ago was you can bring your own questions. That's not a good thing.
Right.
But we have a lot of groups that, for instance, are in the Simon Searchlight survey. It's very autism and intellectual disability specific. They're a great organization. They also open their data to any researchers that want it. And they also look across very, very rare genetic neurodevelopmental disorders. So we will partner with them. We have a table that says this is what Simon's does, and this is what we do, and this is what the difference is, and this is why you need to do both. And when I launch to a group that has multiple, and we do have a Milan syndrome does have a Cords still open because researchers are actively using it, and it's very Milan specific. And they launched us, and they launched Citizen the same day. So I was really nervous. But
I can understand that. And I can understand how things are moving quickly, and to your point, I think we did fall into at the time, the selling point that we get to our own low syndrome specific registry. We thought that was the good thing. But I should maybe at the time it was, and to your point, so I'm not even sure you've got Cords on your board, but I need to be able to understand what's the value of collaborating with RareX with Cords, and Cords couldn't answer it. And I'm just, someone's going to have to be able to answer without me going on websites, the very nuanced questions of what makes sense for us to do, or what the differences are if we were to work with RareX versus just sit with Cords where we're at now.
Right. I can take that offline with you. Actually, our director of research and science is involved in that, Carmen, and I can get more information from her. But not only do your families get confused if there's 2, They just know that they answered questions. They don't remember that it was called CORDS, or they remember that it was on the RareX platform. And frankly, I don't encourage you to talk about RareX. They don't need to know that we're involved. They don't need to know they don't need to know about standards or IRBs. All they need to know is, how do they get there? How long does it take? What's in it for them? And what happens if they lose their password?
Agree. I totally agree with you.
And if that's the case, somebody has to be constantly messaging, not the head of the foundation that's saying, come to the conference, raise money on Rare Disease Day. Don't forget to wear, use your blue light bulbs. That person has got enough to do, and they're already talking about a lot of things. And this is where we go back to that social media person. That person that's like, oh, somebody comes on and says, we just got, the diagnosis. And Susie says, I'm so sorry. We all have been in your shoes. It's a marathon, not a dash. We're here for you. And when you have time, here's a link to something specific to our disease. And it will help you communicate to your doctor on your next visit. And then 2 days later, someone comes on and says, it was bad enough in my 30s getting 3 hours of sleep, and now I'm in my 50s. I can't take it anymore. And Susie comes on and says, I'm with you, sister. Did you fill out the 2 sleep surveys? We'll never get a treatment for this disease if we can't tell researchers about the sleep problem. That's because I don't have one on now, but everybody loves these little awareness things. And I got them. I've got all sorts of them. But they're creating awareness in places like the grocery store and, a backyard barbecue. I need awareness in the neurologist's office, the nephrologist's office, and at the drug companies. And these things aren't going to do it. Having data is a microphone. And the more data you get on more people, the louder your voice is. So that's what we have to explain to the families. But frankly, in 2009, I didn't care about research on my daughter's disease. I didn't think it was going to happen in her lifetime. And I was very busy and overwhelmed, and I wasn't there to help other people. Sorry, but I wasn't.
Right.
And what I realized is the data we collected and gave back to the families was going to IEP meetings. It was going to neurologist's office. So families need to know that this isn't just for the future. This is data that they can use now to better understand their own family member or their own disease, also to communicate it to doctors and caregivers. So this is something that it can't just be, you've got to do this, we need a cure. Some people aren't interested in a cure. Some people, aren't interested in anything that comes from a pharmaceutical company. But if they understand that there's other value to them, they will get involved. But the trick truly is keeping the message going all through the year. And it's not, you need to finish these surveys, you need to finish these surveys, you need to finish these surveys, because it becomes like taxes. It's just something you don't want to do.
So on that point, has anyone in your group used artificial intelligence to extract data from EMRs so that you can take the caregiver out of it and get that information? Because I am the president, a new president, and I am in that role of hammering people and talking about things I shouldn't be. And that's why Corey's on the call, thank God. But I think the bottom line is what I'm struggling with right now, Caitlin, is I've got moms in the hundreds in a closed Facebook group chatting. I have very few registries, meaning if we're looking at, we think we're not as rare as our numbers show, because we're not tracking numbers with we're not getting our folks enrolled. And so I'm really concerned about that. And so we've been at this for such a long time, bringing cords to our conference, signing them up in person. I mean, we've had rare disease and we've had incentives. I've been on Zoom calls where I sit there for an hour with no one calling in asking. So I think the way you guys, I've seen enough and talked to other folks, the way you're positioning and making this much more user-friendly is definitely the way to go. And the things that families should know and what they don't need to know, I think you're 100% spot on. At the end of the day, though, what tech have you guys been successful, or anyone's been successful using technology to help populate?
We absolutely have the technology, and over time we'll have the funding. But right now, what I have to you at no cost is not extend to connecting to medical records.
Is
But
that offered
The
at a cost?
consenting and the technology will be available at some point. I can't tell you when. If it
Yeah.
becomes really, really important to a specific sponsor, then it'll happen faster. We do have a partnership with Citizen. Citizen started out as, most of these companies are US only because of the European rules. It was a cancer registry specific. It then became also rare disease, and it was then bought by Invitae. But it's Citizen with 2 I's, and we partnered with them, and we were piloting. There was an organization that was collecting data at Citizen, where the parents say, these are my 15 doctors, these are my 5 hospitals. Yes, you can go get my data, and Citizen goes and gets it.
Got it.
That's one stage of it. That's not the expensive stage. The expensive stage is then culling through all those scans, because they're getting scan data, not just what's in the portal, and then mapping that exactly the way you said. Mother says child doesn't sleep becomes, what is the code for insomnia? Or mother noted convulsions and shaking, where does that code to potential epilepsy? That's very expensive, and that's why that is not a free program. But that is what that patient community needs. And most of those groups are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. And when at the end of the day, the family gets the structured medical records, the organization like yours would get the structured medical records if the family consents to it. And then if there's a sponsor, would get it. The thing you have to be careful about when you are shopping is, hey, can we get medical records? Oh, sure, we can connect to your portal. That's great if you have a disease where there are labs, a cancer, or any type of where what's in the portal is all you need. My daughter's disease, there's nothing in the labs. Like her portal tells me her vaccinations, her weight, and it's in the medical scan reports. Mother reports that, or child has lost weights, and the weight would be in that portal, but any clinical notes isn't going to be. So when you're asking that question, can you connect to medical records? Make sure you're differentiating between, is it scanned reports or is it portal? And for some diseases, the portal's just perfect. There was another question in there, I think. Well, did I answer yours?
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, we talked at one point to Invitae and to Citizens, and I don't know, it was a complicated and maybe expensive process, but it sounds like it exists. I just didn't know if anyone has done it well, how much they spent. And I think it's a matter of time, to your point, of getting, catching up and being able to do this. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like the only direction we can go as rare diseases, to really get the robust data we need, if it's possible, based on what you just said.
In terms of enrollment, every disease has different motivators. So we had a disease that launched in our first class, but they had a golf tournament and they had other stuff, and it was one dad and that was it. And after over a year of me saying, I need a social media person, he finally gets me one. We have a great call. And last Saturday, we did a relaunch party. 12 parents showed up, surprisingly, a lot of dads. And I said, while I'm doing this, here's the link, start enrolling now. And, their numbers have gone up, and we gave them something that they wanted, which is, we're going to give the data back to you. In some diseases that I think Dent, they're trying to find people in families. So this is, very hereditary. And so, the value prop may not be, we're going to give you data back. It may be, this is the only place that's collecting all of the people with Dent disease around the world, and we need to know where these connections are and so forth. So we have to work with each organization individually and say, what lights your families up? What is going to motivate them to get this done? And it might be the sleep survey data.
When you give data back, do you guys, is this like a report friendly thing that you have like access to on the back end? I mean,
Not currently. It will be something that will have visualization, and you can do some general querying on as a organization lead.
Okay.
What we currently have is, you would get city training, which we we pay for up to 2 people for organization. And once you've gotten your training certificate, it takes a couple hours, then you get access to being a data analyst in the system. But currently that only lets you see when did people enroll, how many people are enrolled, and where are they from. Our ultimate goal is for you to know that, of the 50 people that answered the, vision loss survey, 30 reported, or whatever percent reported, age of onset was pre-puberty, that kind of thing. So
Right.
that kind of data is what you want, and we understand that. We're still growing, but we
Got it.
also decided that we don't really want that data to be instant for you, because the instant data hasn't been cleaned and verified. And when you're talking about really small numbers, if 2 parents enroll the same person and they're in there twice, or if somebody loses their password or forgets what email they use and they recreate the account, then you have duplicates and your numbers are off. So we do a manual cleaning quarterly. As we get more data analysts, that will become probably more, but I'm being very clear with you right now. We do it quarterly. And then after that quarter, we put some metrics in a shared file where those 2 people that have had training can go see what, we just did it last week. So you can see how many people are actually. There's a question where they say, I'm willing to share my name and email with an organization. You'll get that list. That's all you get, just their name and email.
Right.
And survey completion. So 40 people said yes to vision loss. Only 20% of them have finished the vision loss survey. So you don't know who didn't do it, but you know that it either is getting done or it's not getting done. And then you just customize, or Susie and Joni, and not you, customize the messaging in social media accordingly. The other thing is, when there are conferences, you can do on-site. We can give you tips for on-site enrollment, but you want to present back some data.
Right. Right.
The long-term goal.
I appreciate the cleaning of the data for sure.
The visualization that we're in the process of building, and I cannot tell you when it's going to come, but we are very motivated, is after we've cleaned that data, then you would be able to go into the system and, as a non-researcher, ask questions like, how many people have this, or of the people under this age, how many have this and this, and then that's the goal, and that's what we're moving toward, and that's what I say to people is, your first target area of your families are those that are interested in research. The people that ask questions about it, the people that show up for webinars about it, they're low-hanging fruit. They'll answer this survey no matter what. And then there's the new families who just don't know what else to do and would do anything. And I'm not saying that you should take advantage of them, but it's a good way for them to learn more about the disease. Outside of the church are the Megans of 2009. You're like, let somebody else do it, or it's not going to change anything. When they start seeing the visualizations, when they start seeing you saying, we got 20 people enrolled in the last 2 months, then there's a little FOMO. Like, if you are able to report back that 80% of people reported, sleep issues, and somebody out that hasn't really participated also has sleep issues, they're like, wait, I didn't get counted in that. I want to be heard. And that's exactly the term that we put out to the groups. Tell your families, be counted, be seen. And that's kind of woven through their messaging all the time. So, you don't go after the people that are hard to sell to start with. You go after the people that are easier to engage. But we've had people do enrollment parties. Somebody did a sip-in survey on a Friday night. And we can have somebody, available for those if they think that there's going to be technical questions. You can do incentives. We can't, but you can. But it shouldn't be everybody who does this, or everybody who shows up gets an Amazon card. It's better if you say, we will do a drawing from everybody who registers and shows up for this webinar. And from that drawing is a, Instapot or a, something more significant than a $10, gift card. I don't know if I'm getting all the questions. Caitlin, have you?
There's a really good question in the chat. It says, our organization has a natural history study underway by some European researchers, but it has stalled. Can RareX be a piece for us that will help to give more data participants to the study?
Yes. And initially those researchers may be like, oh, wait, they're going to take our patients and we will meet with them if you want. And we'll say, no, we're going to make this better. We're going to help you find more patients because we're going to be collecting patients from around the world, but we're not going to do as deep of a dive as your natural history study might be doing. And you'll be able to go into RareX and find exactly the type of patients that you're looking for that you haven't been able to recruit in the past, and we'll help you recruit them. So absolutely. I mean, the way I want your families to think of this is the LSA data collection program. And we don't call it a registry because frankly, that word doesn't mean much to people that aren't in the know. It's very confusing. So it's a data collection program. It's not the association's collection program. It's not the NIH. It's not King's College. It's not Dr. Smith's. It's the community's data collection. This is for them, by them, and only as good as they make it. And it should complement the research that's already happening and the research that's going to happen. And we make that very clear to families. This doesn't replace it, but it should complement it. And one example is in neurodevelopmental disorders, there's a battery of assessments that we hate as parents. One of them is called the Vineland. And it's long and it's expensive for people to give. And lots of different people ask for it at different stages. So we have committed, because our experts told us that we should be collecting the Vineland data, to contract with the company that does the Vineland, and we are getting that data. It's a 45-minute survey. We don't like long surveys. So we prepared the families and said, we know this isn't great. Set aside a gallon of ice cream when you're done, but you're going to be asked for this over and over again. And if we can get enough people answering it here, then when they ask for it 2 years from now, we just send them back to RareX. So we're trying to really, that researcher that comes to you 2 years from now and says, I want to ask these 200 questions, you can say, guess what? We've already asked 125 of them in RareX. You only have to ask 75 now. And at that point, we would talk about a consent where that data might even actually eventually combine with the data in RareX. So if Mary Smith was already in RareX and Mary Smith did the new study in Europe, that when that researcher is done with that data would combine with her original, and that gives more data in one place. This is not an area, and I'm sure you all probably know this, where more registries are better, because it just makes for more silos. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I can answer a few more questions if anybody wants to stay on. I don't think Invitae does scanned reports, to my knowledge.
Okay.
They started out as they are a genetic lab, and that is their major contribution to the world. They bought Patients Crossroads, which I was familiar with, and you can bring in your own questions. Yeah. Standardization, the importance of it is spreading. So I think a lot of these platforms that didn't have standardized surveys are now going to that. So that may not make us as unique as it did a year ago. I'm not sure, Corey, what the question about price is. There is no cost to you all for this. We are a nonprofit.
No, but I'm talking about companies that will provide that AI for the medical records to go into that data. I think we've had such struggles, parents, right? I don't have to tell you, just the day-to-day dealing with life, and to get them to go on and to fill this out, that we were hoping to possibly go that route to collect our data. And so we're just kind of learning about that, the pros, the cons.
There's a lot of pros, but I would argue it's not as gold standard as you might think, because think about your office visits. They only ask you about specific things. They're not asking you about all the systems in the body.
Right, so,
And they make mistakes when that goes into the chart. So that medical, that comprehensive medical chart it's great, but it's not asking, just like the researchers that didn't ask the questions.
so like
So-
in renal, like, I mean, an example I could think is, right, so our boys have renal issues. So at what age are their creatinine levels? So something like that is more concrete and easy to, right? So there's eye doctors, renal doctors, neurologists, right? So those are our three main physicians we deal with.
So I would imagine, and I don't know anything about renal, is that when we get to the point of having a renal working group,
Yeah,
that no matter what your renal disease is,
Yeah.
if creatinine is an issue, then somebody's going to want to ask about it. And that's going to be part of everybody gets asked that.
yeah.
But I see a future where we will have to, I mean, the conversations I've heard are we're going to be able to collect things like EEGs and MRIs and labs, but I'm not promising you anything today. I don't want to need you. I don't want to say we're going to have it in 6 months, but generally it's not generally a technology issue. It's a consenting issue, which we've already made sure won't be an issue.
Yeah.
It's a funding issue, which we have sponsors who are very anxious for us to be successful.
Yeah.
Biopharma is tired of getting subpar data from groups that think they've done a good job or having to start a registry, because when a biotech is asking questions of families, there's a trust issue. When you're telling families to answer a survey, they have a trusting relationship with you. So it's just a whole different thing.
It's interesting. I know, right? You think it's going to be the gold standard, but right. So I'm a nurse by trade, so I know how entries are not really what they should always be. Correct.
And in billing codes, we don't have billing codes in rare disease. A lot of us don't. And very nice doctors will put the wrong bill, will put a billing code on something so that we get insurance coverage.
Right. That's right.
But in fact,
the higher reimbursement,
but in fact, it's not an accurate billing code. So doing in rare disease, doing anything with billing codes could be really misleading.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I'm not saying RareX is the goal. What I'm saying is that it's a combination of things, and RareX was designed to be the hub.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it has to be a nonprofit in order to do this, because when you try and make money out of it,
right,
you have to silo the data. And that's Cords is also a no cost to you.
Yeah.
They just don't have the same infrastructure that we have.
So just to follow up on the natural history study question, that was mine. Because we're going to be meeting with our scientific board, and we want to take this next step of a registry or data platform. And so I guess I just want to be able to answer to them, the researchers doing the study, if we move forward with RareX, does that mean like the work they've already done to collect data, like they're kind of having to start over if we provide them with RareX data? Or how does it, because if I imagine it will be a lot of the same people who volunteered for the study will then be like the first to volunteer.
They're the low-hanging fruit. They're going to do it too. So one, remember in science class, which I never did well in, you did a study and then you had to replicate it. Well, if what is in RareX validates what they've done, that saved them from having to replicate it. So it's a win-win, I think. I will warn you, their initial thing might be, this is going to confuse and compete with us and we're not going to be able to recruit. Mm-hmm. And your answer will be, no, RareX wants you to be successful, and RareX will explain why both things are valuable. And I mean, I've sat at plenty of conferences where it's my table, Citizen, and Simon's Searchlight. And I'm like, well, go to them first because you need the birth certificate. And then they're going to need blood. And then when you're finished after lunch, come back to me and I'll show you how to get enrolled. I mean, we complement each other. We share the same mission of open science, open data. We're not trying to hoard it. And I'm not speaking ill of them in their study, keeping their data. That's just how research is done. You can't go sharing things until you've published on it, and it takes a while to do that. So they're not doing the wrong thing, but they should be able to benefit from us. And I think they just need to understand. I had this issue with CHOP in one of our groups. They need to understand that we're not competing with them. We're not researchers. We're not trying to publish, and that we're trying to help you get people from around the world, which could in turn help theirs. Is their study all in person, or is it also virtual? Okay.
None of it is in person. Yeah.
But this could essentially maybe save money. Now, have they already started it?
Yeah, they got, 40 people consented, but they only got data on 23. And so that's where it just sort of, and then they lost their fellow and it just stalled. And so we've gotten more, members to our group since then, and we want more participation.
One strategy, and we can talk about this offline because I know we're over time, is it's really expensive for them to recruit and retain patients. And it's really expensive. The more surveys they ask, the more questions they ask, the more time they have to pay some research assistant to enter that into a computer and do analysis on it. If they look to see what are we covering, that they don't have to ask. Like, we are not going to do scans. We're not doing blood work. We're not doing imaging. Keep that to them. But what can we do, or are we already doing that they're not, that they also do? And can they scale down their color? You know what I mean? Can they save themselves some money? But I like things to be connected and clean and neat. I want Mary Smith's data in RareX connected to Mary Smith's labs at the Natural History Study. And to do that, they would have to change their consent so that Mary says, I consent to have, King's College take my blood and I won't sue you. And I consent to have my identified data from this study, shared with my account at RareX. And they would probably want to put some time limit on it. Like, they're going to want to publish on it first, but ultimately that data would make it back to RareX. Now, there is going to be a cost. There would be a cost for that, but sometimes you can find sponsors and things like that. And that's where I said collect and connect data. So sometimes it depends on the personalities and the previous experience of the researchers, but I'm happy to present to researchers as well. There, on our website in the right-hand corner, there is a research tab. And within the research tab, there's also a button that says access. And it walks them through how they can access data in RareX.
Okay.
Corey, did you have any other questions? Sure.
No, I think this was very helpful. Right. I think I have to go back to the website and look around a little bit. And yeah, I know Jerry had to jump off. She had, something.
That's fine. I will tell you, I'm doing this as a mission that I don't ever want to see anybody else go through what I went through for 10 years. We worked so hard. Our families were so, like they did the surveys.
What disease does your daughter have?
Phelan-McDermott syndrome. It's similar to Angelman or Fragile X or some of those other diseases in a row. And we didn't get publications. And the fact of the matter is, it was because we made up our own questions. And researchers, when you use a standardized survey, if it's a drop down, answer A codes to a certain, they call it omics, like different, there's SNOMED and there's the human phenotype ontology. There's these different ontologies. And ours didn't code to anything because they were made up. So that's where, yes, there are times where you need to have something very, very specific, but most of the time you can use something that's been standardized and does code to something. And that, just saves.
Well, that's even important with NIH grants, I know, because, right, if it's, affecting 3 kids or 300,000 kids, right, that becomes a factor.
The other thing I did not cover is if a researcher or an industry partner does want to recruit, They can't come to you because you don't know who the people are. So they're going to come to us and they're going to say, here's a list of 10 people, here's their ID numbers. We want to recruit them for another survey, or we want to recruit them for a clinical trial. We would first ask for their IRB approved, proof, language that the IRB approved for recruitment. And before we send that email out to those 10 patients and say, Dr. Schmo at University of wherever thinks that you'd be a good candidate, we would say, but first, we'd like to introduce you to the organization or multiple organizations that belong to these diseases, because they will be helping you recruit also, because not all of their patients are going to be in MIRAX. And at that point, it's up to you in terms of how you want to work with them. If there's a monetary ability for you to do anything in terms of recruitment outcomes and things like that, that's between you and them. But we make sure the relationship goes to the organization, because there's nothing in it for us.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Caitlin put the link for researchers access in the chat. It was great to meet you guys.
Thank you so
and,
much. Yeah.
You're welcome to shoot us an email if you have any questions. And our next group of diseases, we will probably start onboarding in April. So, but it's ongoing, so it's not like you have to make a decision and be in the next class. So I recommend that this be a decision that you have discussed with your scientific advisors and your board, because we've had a couple groups that stalled after onboarding because it was not a unanimous decision. So, and Caitlin just put our emails in the chat, so that's great. Well, I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you can hear the road construction outside of my house. And it was great to meet you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too.